Welcome to the concurrent session entitled Technology Innovations in Clinical Teaching and Practice. My name is Chris Ann Hazen, and I will be helping to moderate this session. Some quick housekeeping announcements. The session will be recorded, so if you're more comfortable keeping your video off, feel free. Please mute yourself unless you are asking a question. A reminder that the conversation will continue in our small groups, which will again meet after this session beginning at 12:15 Eastern. Please note that this is half an hour earlier than the start times on Monday and Tuesday. And in a minute, I will put some contact information in the chat if you're having trouble connecting to the small groups. A quick reminder, there are 3 asynchronous videos to view, and I will put the location of those videos in the chat as well in a minute. Materials for this session can be found on the Google Drive page, which we've been sharing all week, and we'll add that link in the chat in a moment. And then finally, if you have questions during the session, please put them in the chat as the speakers are talking, and they will handle them at the end. So now I'd like to briefly introduce our speakers. I'm going to stop sharing there for a minute. And just give me a moment to spotlight them. Conrad Johnson is a clinical professor of law at Columbia Law School, where he is co-founder and co-director of the Lawyering in the Digital Age Clinic, which is celebrating its 20th anniversary and was the first clinic nationally focused exclusively on the impact of technology on law and law practice in the profession. Nickole Miller is currently a visiting assistant professor of law at the University of Baltimore School of Law and will be joining Drake Law School, the Drake Law School faculty this summer to direct their children's rights clinic. Michelle Pistone is professor of law and founding director of the Clinic for Asylum, Refugee, and Immigrant Services. She is a leader in online legal education and facilitates a boot camp on designing a law course, an online 3-day interactive boot camp to guide law professors in instructional design and how to design a successful law course. And with that, I will turn it over to our presenters.
Great. Welcome, everyone. We're so excited to have you here and to be talking today about how you may use technology in your clinical courses, and also think about how it impacts the learning goals, both at a course level, but also at a unit level for the classes that you might be teaching this upcoming year. So before we get started, we wanted to do just a kind of quick little poll to get a temperature of the room and see who we have. So let's see if I can launch this successfully. Everyone, thumbs up from the other presenters if you see the poll. Okay, fabulous. Okay, we got about half people voting so far. Great. So it looks like the vast majority are teaching in in-house clinics, 79%, about 13% in externship. We've got a person teaching a hybrid and 2 in some sort of other experiential learning course. And we've got a good mix between people who have are brand new, 0 to 1 years of experience, 29% at 2 to 3, and 4 more, 39%, which is awesome. We're going to have some opportunities for folks to share out things that they maybe have done in their clinics. And I think those who've taught this past year in an online teaching environment are all experts and probably have lots of information to share with others. And it looks like vast majority here don't currently have a course or unit level learning goal for classes related to technology. And hopefully one of our goals is that you may consider adding one of those to your courses after the session today. So with that, we'll just kind of go quickly over the agenda for today. So we're going to start off with a brief overview of student-centered design principles. So we're not going to go into too much detail into clinic or externship design, because that's going to be something that's covered in greater detail tomorrow during the other concurrent sessions. But it's important to have that kind of framework as we move into talking about how technology can be incorporated into both course and unit level learning goals. Then we'll move on to discussing how we can leverage technology to really diversify the content that we have in our clinics. We're going to demo just a few platforms to use for learning activities, and Chrisanne will share the link to the Google Drive box for the conference, where we've added more examples and resources for folks to be able to utilize after today. We'll talk about how the use of technology can really improve feedback and assessment of student learning, and then we'll end with some time for questions. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Michelle Pistone.
All right, great. So, So what we're going to do today is focus on the process for, as Nickole said, the process for designing a clinical course. And we kind of divide it up into these 4 stages. So the first stage is thinking about what your learning goals are. So there, and we look at course level learning goals and also unit level learning goals. So at the course level, those are probably in your syllabus, or you'll want them to be in your syllabus. And the guiding questions that you should think about in designing course level learning goals is, what do you want your students to know, to be able to do, and to value? And there's a lot of resources available, including like Bloom's taxonomy, that helps you to think about the verbs and the words that you want to use in designing a course or a unit level learning goal. And Conrad will talk a little bit more about unit level learning goals and course level learning goals as they apply in clinical education. So after you have your course level learning goals, then the next stage is to think about the learning content. So the learning content is the material that you give to students that helps them to actually it's like when you transfer information from the expert, from you or from somebody else, to the student. So that would be readings, videos, podcasts, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a little while. So after you've thought about your learning goals and you want the content to align with those learning goals, then the third stage of the process is to think about learning activities. So how will the students put their learning to work? What will they do that will allow them to show you that they understand what you're asking them to do? Those are the learning activities. And then the fourth stage of the process is feedback and assessment. So how will the students get a sense of what, how will you as a professor get a sense that the students have actually learned what you want them to learn? And so those are the guiding principles. I realize that this slide doesn't reflect those questions. So in the Google Drive, we'll have the correct slide in there. But basically what this design process is focused on doing is starting with learning goals, figuring out content, and then learning activities that align with the goals, and then feedback and assessment at the end. And we're going to go through this process today. So let me get to the next slide and turn it over to Nickole. I'm trying to. There we go. We'll turn it over to Conrad, sorry. Okay. So we're starting with unit level learning goals, and I'm going to stop sharing so Conrad can share.
Thanks. Okay, so I'm gonna share with you. You scared me a second there, Michelle. I thought maybe I had the wrong plan up. All right, so picking up from where Michelle, tell me, you can all see the student learning goals. You can see those? Yes? Great.
Yes.
Okay, good. So hang on one second. Let me just move this over so I can see you. All right. So the idea here is that you've heard about course level goals, and the course level goals, as Michelle was saying, was what do you want the students to know? What do you want them to do? What do you want them to value? And these are more generalized goals for obviously for the whole course. And I've pulled together a list of 9 for some particular reason of my favorite technology related goals that you might consider incorporating in your teaching because they may be helpful to your students. And as Chris Ann noted early on, in your materials, you'll see an excerpt from the teaching and learning goals that I use for my clinic in the materials. So that should be there for you to use for the help that it might offer you. So as Chris Ann's introduction noted, I co-founded the Lawyering in the Digital Age Clinic. Our overarching goal is to explore the impact of technology on law practice and the profession. And we do that by working with public interest legal organizations and public interest lawyers and judges who have a sincere interest in integrating technology into their service delivery systems and expanding access to justice. And we do that because we think it fills a niche out there in the world. We know that public interest legal organizations are often cash strapped and under enormous pressure to handle the cases before them, and they won't have enough time or money to devote to experimenting with technologies that might actually be helpful to them. And so we do that for them. We're an incubator lab for them. At the same time, we fill a niche for our students. As you all have probably gathered in your careers so far, legal education has been slow to incorporate teaching about law practice, even though most of our students are going out into practice. And we don't want to compound that felony by teaching practice in a way that ignores the current realities of contemporary practice, which involve a lot of understanding of technology. So that's why we're doing this now. And in the end, we want to encourage you to do that as well. What we want to do here is talk some about some of the goals that we have for you. So these are some of the parts that the questions that Michelle wanted you to answer. So our goals. One course level goal you might have is professional responsibility. And as you know, let me see if I can make this happen. Didn't happen. Oh, my goodness. What is happening here? Hang on. Sorry about that. Doing it the old-fashioned way. So as you know, the ABA has a set of model rules, and rule number 1 is competence, which I'm not showing well now. But the rule suggests that in order to remain competent, you ought to keep abreast of the changes in law and the practice of law, including the benefits and risks associated with technology. And so to just fulfill our professional responsibility, we want to teach students to be competent by incorporating an understanding of contemporary practice, particularly the risks and benefits of technology, into our teaching goals. Another goal we have is to be better advocates. We want our students to see with new eyes. We want them to imagine new ways of solving old problems. So for example, This semester, we had a legal services office in Buffalo, New York, that understood that the pandemic was going to cause an uptick in bankruptcies and that people weren't going to be able to come into the clinic to declare bankruptcy. And so we created a way online for clients to engage with the Western New York Law Center, to get some educational materials, to fill out intake forms, to have one-on-one meetings online with lawyers and volunteers, so that they could actually get bankruptcies filed without having to ever come into the office. So these are solutions that are out there for all of us and for all of our students, but they won't see them if they're not thinking about how to use technology. If all they were thinking about is, well, you got to come into the office and we've got to have an in-person interview and we've got to file papers online. Another goal we have is transferable skills. Obviously, we want to teach students skills that they can use throughout their careers. And if we think about their careers, we think about the beginning of their careers. What will they be doing to get a job? And we believe that understanding technology creates value in the applicant, in our students, because whether they're going to public interest work or private sector work, their employers have already spent a great deal of money on technology. Problem is, they're probably using it at a very primitive level. And if you can provide students with an understanding of how to use even existing technologies, and we typically with all of our clients use just their existing technologies, how to use those technologies to do their work in a way that suits their goals, you've added value to them in the job market. And we know that our students are in a job market where they're likely to hold multiple jobs over time. And so the importance of having transferable skills has gone up in my teaching experience. Learning styles. Obviously, students have very different learning styles. And so do clients and adversaries and triers of fact. And we want to use technology to engage our students who have different learning styles. So we can talk to them the way we're talking to you now. We can show them things the way we're showing you things now. We can include video and audio. We can do all kinds of things that might cross the variations of learning styles and ultimately engage our students and have our students engage their clients. We want to prepare for the current reality of practice, which is something we talked about earlier. We want our students to practice at the top of their license. Why? Because one of the things that technology brings to law practice is the idea that the machine, through artificial intelligence or machine learning, predictive coding, all these kinds of things, unbundled services will eat certain areas of practice that will be dead-end areas of practice. So those are primarily areas of practice that rely on what I would call manufactured complexity. The lawyer who charges a ridiculous fee for simply changing the names on a digital form. Well, you can get that done through various online outlets now for a fraction of the price. Document review is still going to be going on, but more and more it's going to be tending towards AI and technology-assisted review, so that you're not going to find jobs in those areas. And so you want your students to be prepared to practice in the more complex areas where lawyers' judgment and analysis is important, where AI and machine learning are not likely to eat that portion of the market. So we want our students to practice at the top of their license to avoid dead-end practice. And ultimately, we know that technology will change, but the core lawyering skills will likely remain. And so I want to talk a little bit about those. Let me just back up. So we say that law is a profession that runs on information, and that every lawyer essentially engages in one of three tasks. They gather information, they manage information, they present information. In our clinic, Lawyering in the Digital Age, we teach traditional skills. So in the gathering information unit, we would teach the traditional skill of interviewing. In the managing information unit, we would teach the traditional skill of counsel. In the presenting information unit, we teach the traditional skill of drafting. However, we would combine those with contemporary skills. So in the gathering unit, we would teach the traditional skill of interviewing, but the contemporary skill of electronic fact gathering. In managing information, we would talk about the traditional skill of counseling, but we'd also explore knowledge management and how that is changing the way lawyers practice. And in presenting information unit, we would talk about the traditional skill of drafting, but we would add presentation using digital tools, courtroom technology, and web design to help our students understand what's going on in the environments in which they will be working. So basically our goals are core lawyering skills. These are our course level goals: to study the impact of technology on law practice, to work with lawyers, judges, and clients on real cases. But really what we're talking about is basic lawyering. And that's something we want you to see, which is technology isn't an add-on. It is integrated, interwoven into the fabric of the way lawyers work. And to try and teach lawyering without addressing how the tools of technology affect the way we practice is teaching lawyering with, one hand at least tied behind your back, and not preparing students for the world in which they will practice. And we want that to be something that guides our work. So having talked some about course level learning goals, let's turn some to the unit level learning goals. Unit level learning goals are still about what you want students to know, do, and value, but they tend to, at least in my view of it, direct students to how to effectuate these broader goals. And so if we think about the gathering information unit that we teach, and we think about interviewing, we would say, well, let's think about how what one would do before the interview. How would you plan? Well, we would say use a model. We use a binder and price model, and we would ask students to, in a word processing document, just put in the components of a binder and price model. And then we would have them in class discuss the purposes of each of these components and add to their notes, however they wanted to express it, what those purposes look like. So it might look something like this. And then we would have us in class experiment with introducing each of these components, where students would have to add the words to explain, well, now we're going to do a problem identification. This is what we want to accomplish here. And students can supplement this living document so that it becomes a plan for generically for them, that they can use throughout their careers, and the beginnings of a plan that they could use for the simulated client that we bring in just to introduce some of these skills at the beginning of the semester. So we can use technology to encourage them to start digital and stay digital, to create that living document that I was just showing. We can tell them that as they're preparing for their interview, they ought to do some online fact investigation. And so we would ask our students to spend an hour looking at the intake memo that describes their simulated client and just see what they can find in an hour that might be useful to them in this interview. We have them post it to a discussion board and have them look at what they and their colleagues have found, which in the aggregate, even with 8 or 9 students, turns out to be a pretty good library of interesting information that no one person might have found. And so in this way, they see that online fact investigation is part of their due diligence. Obviously, during the interview, we would have them supplement their living document with the responses that they get from their client. We would have them incorporate learning styles by having them show visuals, roadmaps, and timelines and a chronology. And then, of course, after the interview's over, we would try to give our clients access to existing resources that might fill in gaps in what they need to know. So our simulated client's case takes place in housing court. And in New York City, the housing court has put up lots of videos about what to expect in housing court and how to present yourself and what services are available. So we would make those things available to our students and from our students to their clients. The idea here is that we're teaching a piece of gathering at the unit level that incorporates technology at multiple levels through the medium, through what they have to do, through what they can offer their clients, so that their gathering has a more holistic approach. And so they're not looking at interviewing as a separate, distinct, discrete skill that has nothing to do with other gathering chores. So I'd like to think at this point you've got a sense of some of the course level learning goals and then how one might apply them in a particular unit. And with that, I'll stop sharing and I'll turn it back over to Michelle.
Okay, that was great, Conrad. And so I'm going to pick up again by sharing my screen and moving us into, so we talked about the course level and the unit level learning goals. And then the next step is to think about the learning content. So when you're designing a course and you're thinking about learning content, again, the guiding questions are how will the students gain knowledge? How will you or another expert that you're working with or an expert through who's written about it transfer the knowledge to the students? So what we want to do in student-centered design is to make sure that we give students the content that aligns with the learning goals. So if your learning goal, for example, is to have students understand and be able to plan for an interview, then your course content might be the reading that that Nickole put in the chat, the Binder and Price model for how to engage, how to plan for and engage in an interview. So when we think about that in the context of online technologies, the learning content could include links to online readings, to statutes, to regulations. But I think that technology adds another level of excitement when we think about learning content. Because as Conrad was talking about, when we're creating learning goals, we want to think, one of the goals is to think about how to reach all types of learners. And through technology, we can reach different types of learners by thinking about how to use video, how to use audio, how to use, like podcasts. And I think that there's a lot of benefit to thinking about video and podcasts in
You got muted, Michelle.
Okay, sorry about that. Well,
Your last thing you were saying what's exciting about using video and podcasts.
Okay, so one of the things that's exciting is that it's very accessible to the students. So the value of that is that we can create a video. So when we lecture to students, they take their notes, but they can't go back and listen to it again. Whereas if we give them a video, they can go back and review the video whenever they want. So it's very accessible. They can, before they're going into a hearing, they can review a video about what's going to happen at that hearing, for example. Or before they go into an interview, they can review a video on how to plan for an interview. So the accessibility thing is really important. The other thing I think is it increases efficiencies in the sense that it reduces redundancy. So for me, there are a lot of things that I teach my students year after year, semester after semester. If I can put that on video, then I've reduced that time. I've made it accessible to the student at a time when they need it. And I've also used my time more efficiently. So I pretty much create like a bookshelf of videos that are available to students semester after semester. And I've actually done a video on how to plan for an interview. So not only do we get to include voices, our own voice in our program, but one of the other benefits of online videos is that we can include other people's voices. So you guys could decide to include one of the videos that Nickole made. And I made videos, like I said, on how to plan for an interview. And those are all available on a website, well, on YouTube through Legal Ed Web. And we can give them, Nickole, the link to that so that you guys can think about including other voices in your program. So that's another thing. What we can do, like as a community, is we crowdsource. Nickole made some videos that I use in my teaching. I made videos that other people use in their teaching. There's a great series of videos on how to work with an interpreter that I use every semester that Layla Haas and Lindsay Harris made a few years ago. 10 years ago, I made a series of videos with Ali Abba on best practices in asylum cases, which law schools around the country are still using. So that's an example of accessibility and efficiency and bringing other voices into your class. So that's in terms of content. And now I'm going to move over to Nickole for learning activities.
Great. And also just to piggyback on it, it sort of connects to what was discussed yesterday in the concurrent session on racial justice in the classroom and in practice, which is bringing in different voices, right, outside of the legal field. So this is a way in which you may be able to engage with community organizers, with different activists, et cetera, and bring in different types of opportunities for students to engage with others. So now
clients is another example of another voice to bring in.
Yep, exactly. So I will be honest, when I had to abruptly transition last year into remote teaching and then sort of spend last summer thinking about how I was going to do this for the full year, I was super, super intimidated because I didn't have any course level or unit level or learning content or learning activities that really leveraged and harnessed technology. I did things pretty sort of traditional, and the prospect of trying to figure out ways in which to incorporate this was a bit daunting. So I'm not going to, so if you're hearing all this and being like, oh my gosh, there's no way I can do this. The answer is yes, you can, but just take it one sort of like little small step at a time. And Michelle, maybe you can put in the chat the information for folks who maybe this is piquing an interest about your upcoming boot camp that you're going to be doing over the summer, because I did that and found it to be really useful. Even with the transition back to in-person teaching, which I can't wait for, I'm going to incorporate a lot of these things that I started using basically out of necessity into my teaching, because what I found is that it was a really useful way in which to get students to engage with the learning content and really sort of met students where they are, right? Our students are, a lot of them at least, are really tech savvy, right? They're using technology day in and day out. And they also have different learning styles, and leveraging different platforms is a way in which to give students different opportunities to contribute, to participate, that's beyond, say, an in-person class discussion. And so I think there's a lot of fun to be had when you're thinking through what learning activities you might be able to incorporate into your seminar. So that really takes some of the traditional activities that you may have already been doing it, but kind of like think about, I think Michelle used this phrase and I've stolen it from her, but like thinking about how to use time and space differently, right? Because I don't know about you, but I'm always running out of time in class. And so having the opportunity to do some of these activities outside of the classroom can really free up a lot of space. So what I thought might be most helpful and for folks is actually just to kind of talk through and maybe demo just a few different platforms that you may want to familiarize yourself with. And this is not to overwhelm you and think, oh my God, I've got to be an expert in all of these different things. But maybe a goal you might set for your summer is to pick one and figure out how you can tie it into your course. So let's see if this works. All right, in theory, you should be seeing a my Google. Got it. Okay, so the first technology piece that I wanted to talk about was one called Perusal. And there is information in this, again, in the Google Drive. And Chrisanne, if you want to just put the link again one more time for folks to be able to access it. I found Perusal to be a really, really great tool to use to foster both active reading in my students, right? And also to allow them to kind of communicate with one another about the materials that they were reading in the course. So oftentimes I'll assign students something to read in the class. This semester I taught a class on family law. And so we were really, we had different readings maybe about interviewing, different materials about thinking through reforms of the civil justice system, bias in the courtroom, and Perusal is a nice way where you can put up the readings that you may have, add some prompts that you want the students to be able to engage with, and they then, as they're reading, have different things in which to look out for. So for example, here's just this is sort of what the interface looks like so that you can see it. I had them read this article by Donna Coker on shifting power for battered women, law, material resources, and poor women of color. And so this, I gave them instructions, right? Use the comment feature, something students are super familiar with because they're on Facebook, they're on Instagram, they're on other things, right? They're commenting all the time about different like arguments, proposals, claims that the professor is putting forth that are making them think differently about domestic violence intervention, right? Then I'm asking them to highlight certain things, to think about ideas that are either new to you or inviting further reflection or activity. These aren't like big things that I'm asking the students to do, but it's a way to kind of hold them accountable. It's a way for them to be able to engage with one another because through this platform, they can comment on one another's comments, and for me to see where the students are, and also to be able to check to see if they're actually doing the reading, because what's really nice here is that there's different metrics that you can use to be able to see how long are the students actually looking at this article, where is it that they're putting their comments, are they all front loaded at the beginning, or are they actually even spaced throughout? So that's one tool that I would say is a really nice one. If you're already giving readings to your students in PDF format, slap them on here, and this is a way in which you can actually get some more engagement with the materials and be able to see how they're doing. Another one, which is like my absolute favorite, is called Flipgrid, and I am going to put a couple links here in the chat, just so that you can hopefully, actually, I will have to probably do this afterwards because wait, here we go. In theory, this should take, oh, nope, that didn't work. Hold on. Apologies. So in theory, this should take you to the Flipgrid page, and it's going to ask for like a guest password. So you can just see how you might want to incorporate this into your course. Let me get that open again. So if you were to go to my course page, I've sort of copied it over, you're going to see I've got all these different topics. And so usually I spend a lot of time in orientation, we spend time introducing ourselves. We're still going to do that in person, but I found it to be nice to actually, before the semester even starts, to have an opportunity where my students come on here and they record a 1-minute thing introducing themselves and saying something. Some of the benefits of that, number one, is that the students get to say their name, they get to say their pronouns, and I know those before class even starts. So if I have, for example, a name that I know is going to be tricky for me, I can practice that before class starts. That was something that was really helpful because for me, that was one of my goals, is not to mispronounce any of my students' names this year, right? So that's a really nice thing to use. Another way, kind of talking through about using space and time differently, is that we do a lot of simulations in my course. So we have the students simulate an interview. We have the students simulate an opening statement, closing arguments, direct exam. We never have enough time for every single student to be able to do a full-blown simulation in person. It's just, it's impossible. I wish there was more hours, but there's not, right? And so Flipgrid is actually a really nice way to have students be able to practice some of these skills in a different setting outside of the classroom, receive feedback so that maybe you have 1 or 2 students do in person and then you have the rest do out of class simulations. So for example, one of the things my students struggle with, and I don't know about yours, maybe it's just mine, is like being able to explain in sort of client-centered, plain language, confidentiality to a client, right? And so before we even get to doing a full-blown interview simulation, I asked them to practice that during Flipgrid and to practice explaining the role of just being a student attorney. These are concepts that in theory should be pretty straightforward, but I've found now after, you know, a few years that it does require some practice. And so this is an opportunity for them to practice thinking through what they might say, and then also to receive feedback, not just from me, but from their colleagues on what they're doing well and questions that they may have. I found that it's been really helpful again for, we use it for like opening statements. We've got a rubric, and Michelle is going to talk in a little bit about the importance of rubrics that students can then use to help do their own self-assessment of their performance of an opening statement, and also to provide assessments of other students. So Flipgrid, I think if I was going to tell you to try one, it might be Flipgrid. Has been great. Another tool for discussion is Padlet. It's sort of like a virtual whiteboard that can be really nice. And I'm showing an example of what we did for our final reflections, because I found this to be actually work better in a virtual format than it did in person, which was we have sort of 3 buckets. We have questions that we like students to reflect on related to their client and their project work, their clinic experience, their professional identity values, and you'll see there's various prompts that I have here. And the students can then go, you know, and write anonymously and respond to those. And it's a nice way, again, for students to have the opportunity who maybe aren't the first to raise their hand in class to engage with the material. And then we use this as a launching point to be able to talk about, you know, whether or not their client was better off having assistance and whether they made a difference. Or for example, you know, how did the clinic help you develop your own professional identity? Having those written first really was useful. And then lastly, I know I'm going over time, so I was gonna demo doing this with you, but I will just show you. Another fun one is easy retro. And maybe I'll just do it really quick. Sorry, I hope that's okay, Michelle, that I'm cutting in a little bit to your time, but I think this might be kind of cool for people to do. I'm gonna put it in the chat. So if you guys can just kind of play along, we'll do a very truncated version. Pick one column of this easy retro. And what you're gonna do is you're gonna see there's these plus signs. Go ahead, you're gonna write something. So write a takeaway you have from the session so far, a remaining question you might have, some tech tools you've used that haven't been mentioned today, or a new teaching idea that you have from class, right? So go ahead, follow the link. And we'll just spend 1 minute populating. And what's really cool about the Fun Retro is that there's features, you'll see there's like a thumbs up, like if something resonates with you, give it a thumbs up, right? Like if you want to comment on something, there's a comment bubble. So then again, there's like ways in which to engage with folks. How does Easy Retro differ than Padlet? I find that Easy Retro is a little bit easier for the commenting function than Padlet, but Padlet is a little bit easier if you want to have multiple questions in each bucket. Padlet works a little bit better. Great. Okay, so I'm going to stop there and hand it over to Michelle. And again, there's lots of good additional resources that are there for you in our Google Drive.
Okay, thanks, Nickole. That was amazing. So those are all great technologies. And one thing to think about, I know that that this can seem very overwhelming, and I saw that as one of the takeaways, is that we can do this incrementally, right? As Nickole said at the beginning, you might decide to choose to use one of those technologies this summer, this next year, get some feedback, and then maybe next summer incorporate another. So we don't want this to feel overwhelming to you at all. And the other kind of takeaway from what Nickole was talking about is how she was able to create prompts that related back to the learning goals, the unit level and the course level learning goals. So that she was making sure that the students were getting out of what, getting things out from the readings or from the discussion boards or from the reflections that align with the goals that she had set for herself, that she wanted the students to achieve over the course of the semester. So then let me just share my screen again, although I don't have it up here. So the last thing to think about in designing a course is feedback and assessment. So what we want to do in feedback and assessment is to give students an opportunity to prove to us as professors that they've learned what we want them to learn, that they've achieved that they've met the learning goals, whether they're course level learning goals or unit level learning goals. And so one of the most important things to think about in assessment is everything that we're learning from learning sciences confirms that students learn best when they get feedback right away, right after they do something. And in clinics, we have such a great opportunity to do that because the nature of our teaching is very active. So students are engaging with material all the time. And what we want to make sure we do is to give them feedback so that there's this loop where they plan, they do, and then they reflect, get feedback, and then they do it again so that they are continuing to learn and grow from their own experience. So it's that plan, do, reflect, plan, replan, redo, reflect. That process is how students learn. And it's very different than traditional legal education, where we don't often use formative assessment. So it's really important as a clinician to think about giving our students feedback throughout the semester on what they're doing. And we can use some of the technologies that Nickole talked about, but on top of that, is thinking about rubrics, for example. So a rubric is a document that, and we have a sample rubric in the Google Drive. It's a document that we share with students to let them know what we're looking for. So what our learning goals are for a discussion board, for example. And then we give them a sense of what a good product would look like what we're looking for in the student's response. So if we tell them what they're looking for, then they can provide an answer that is the best quality that they can, because they know exactly what we're looking for. And so in my practice, in my teaching, I like to give my students rubrics right from the beginning. I don't want to hide the ball. I want them to know what I'm looking for in everything all the work product that they do. And I create a rubric for everything. So I have a rubric for interviewing. I have a rubric for planning for an interview, for counseling, for discussion boards, all of the things for the writing that they do, all the things that, and that way it gives them, the students, feedback and a way to even self-assess. Another way to use technology in assessment is using quizzes. And one of the great things, I love quizzes because they can be graded through the computer, so through your learning management system. So once you've set them up, again, you're reducing your redundancy and you're creating efficiencies, because once you've created a quiz, you can put it on your learning management system and use it semester after semester. Important thing to know about any of these assessments is that we as professors learn how our students are learning by doing formative assessment. So if you do a quiz, for example, and you find that everybody or 80% of the class is getting an answer wrong, that might be about how you're teaching as a professor. So getting that kind of feedback is really helpful, especially if it's just in time, because you can go back and clarify with your class on something that they misunderstood. So think about feedback both in terms of giving feedback to students, but also giving feedback to us as professors. And another thing, another way to use technology is through video. And I know that Nickole mentioned that a little in terms of interviewing, like that video clip that she does where she has students do their read their confidentiality script out loud. Not only does it help them in terms of the role play, but other students in the class get to see how their colleagues are doing the same activity, and they learn and grow from that. So that kind of gets us behind the scenes and opens up interviewing. Through using technology, we're opening up something that's usually behind closed doors. But now we can share it with everybody in the class, and they can all model and grow from each other. So that's my abbreviated session on assessment, so that Conrad will have time to close us up.
All right. So thank you, Michelle. That's very helpful. And these are, I can understand this is a lot that we've crammed into a short period of time. But, you know, one of the bottom lines here is change. We're in the business of change as legal educators. We're in the business of trying to help students have new perspectives, learn new ideas, think in new ways about how to work as a lawyer, how to be a lawyer, what it takes to be a lawyer. And change is hard. It doesn't come easily to most of us. You have to model that openness to change in your work. You have your ways of lawyering. You have your comfort areas in teaching. But law practice and the law itself is always changing, and students need to see that as normal. They need to indeed see it as useful, that the changes in the law, that one case being different from the next, is what keeps it alive and interesting to you. And I'll say that even in clinical teaching, which has tended to be, you know, a group of mavericks more than the conformists, there are orthodoxies, and you may hear them and feel them as you're going through the beginnings of your career. And of course, there are lots of enduring lessons that have been passed down from older clinicians to newer clinicians. And those are to be valued. But as new clinicians, you have a lot to offer your schools and your students, their clients, and the legal academy generally. And we want to encourage you to be innovative. If you have an instinct to try something new, try it. Trust me, as you've seen today, not everything we try and everything I try works perfectly, because things will change on you. But you can learn as you go. And the broader academy and our client community will benefit from your new ideas. We are depending on you to help us move forward, because to stay still in this environment, which is changing so quickly for lawyers, is to die. And we don't want that to happen to clinical education. If you value the work you're doing, if you value the people you're doing it for, be open to change and bring yourselves and your instinct to change into that environment. So I'm going to leave it there and open it up to questions. Unless Michelle or Nickole, you have something else you want to add to that coda.
That's great.
All right. So Chris,
I just want to use the raise hand function, or Chrisanne, were there any questions that we didn't get to that were in the chat?
I didn't see any. You were so quick with your answers. But if someone did ask a question and we're missing it, just in the interest of time, please raise your hand and we'll call on you.
You want them to raise their virtual hand, Chrisanne?
Yes, please, the virtual hand.
I mean, one comment that was in the questions on the Easy Retro, but also the chat too, just to reiterate, and I think it's is that pick one or two additional tools, and just use them to their full potential, versus picking lots of tools and only using them once or twice. And also looking, if you haven't connected with your IT folks, or maybe you have a Center for Teaching Excellence at your university, to see what can already be what your university already has that you might be able to utilize, that's actually built into your whatever learning management platform you have.
Yeah, I would echo that. I'm sorry. I would echo that, because there's a lot. We use our learning management system the way most people use technology. We use about 20% of it. And there's a lot in there that you could be using. And I saw some questions about security, and isn't it going to be a lot to keep switching platforms and all the rest of that? Sometimes you can get past that by just utilizing what you already have that's been vetted and locked down by your university.
Right. And I would echo that too. And one thing to think about is every time you're introducing a new technology, there might be a learning curve for the students. So you want to make sure that you give them the materials that they need in order to understand how to navigate. So Nickole did such a great job at showing us how to navigate those tools. You might want to similarly create a short video on how to navigate, flipgrid, and then post that for your students. If you're really interested, you could post it, give it to us, to Nickole or I, and we could post it on Legal Ed, and then the whole clinical community could benefit from it. Right, and it's true that you should, it's possible that some of your existing technologies that you're using allow you to integrate things. Like Jonathan said that Canvas allows you to integrate perusal, for example.
Yep.
So I think in terms of kind of the big takeaway, it's really important to think about, to be intentional about your course design, and also about technology, how it can be used in teaching and how it can be used to prepare our students as they, as they transition into law. And that we want to make sure that we align everything that we do in the course design with those learning goals. So to be really thoughtful and deliberate about your learning goals, and then figuring out what content you need to provide to students so that they can learn what they need to learn. And then the learning activities give the students an opportunity to put their learning to work, which we know in clinical legal education, that's the core of what we do. We're having our students put their learning to work on a regular basis by testing it, modeling it, planning for it, etc. And then the last stage is to make sure that we give students feedback on the things that they're doing, and hopefully align the feedback with a rubric, a grading rubric, so that the students have a sense of what a good work product should look like. And those, again, are aligned with the learning goals. So that process of learning goals, content, activities, assessment is really core to having a student-centered approach to teaching and learning.
Well, thank you, Michelle, Nickole, Conrad. I think we're ending at the perfect minute. What's coming up the rest of the day is in 15 minutes, our small groups will reconvene. A reminder that if you're signed up for the trivia night tonight, please join us at 8 p.m. And then tomorrow we will have another set of concurrent sessions starting at 11 Eastern. So one more round of applause for our three phenomenal speakers, and everyone enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you everyone for coming and sharing this time with us.
Yep, great seeing you.